Hello. Today we're going to walk through setting up subscriptions with Stripe. So recently, if you didn't know this, we can all thank Fortnite for this. A US judge ruled in favor of basically saying, hey, Apple, you can't deny users for having a link to go and pay for a subscription outside of the platform. Previously, Apple would deny App Store updates or deny your pushing a new app to the Apple Store if you had a link that linked out to a different site where people could go and pay for a subscription. The reason that they did that is because for the first year that you put your app on the App Store, they want to collect 30% of the in-app payments if it's not for a physical good, if it's for an electronically serviced good. Every year thereafter, they collect 15%, which, it's a $1 billion industry. So, Epic Games and Fortnite have been fighting the good fight for a long time. The federal judge finally ruled against this, which now opens the door for collecting payments outside. And that's what we're going to do here today with FlutterFlow. And so I've drawn up a little bit of a diagram of what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to walk through this integration piece by piece. And so what will happen first is the user is going to come in to your mobile application. They're going to sign up for a specific subscription. Okay, off on the right-hand side, I actually have a physical device running this QuickTime player. And if I come into here, I have a little subscription section that I'm going to click on here. And here we can see that I'm on a free plan. And if I want to switch to a supporter plan, we can toggle between monthly or annual. Let's just say I choose monthly. We can go ahead and click upgrade now. It's going to send us to a payment link in Stripe. So right now we're going to go and set this up. And I want you to pay special attention to this email. So I've intentionally made this the more challenging of the situations where a user might have signed up with Apple and have a private relay email address. So you don't have their email ID. And if they go and sign up for a payment, you can't link back via email. So you need to be able to pass their Firebase UID or some kind of user ID for whatever database that you're using. We'll talk about the pieces of this now. So I'm going to jump over to Stripe and we're going to dive in. So the first piece is under the product catalog, we're going to have to set up a new product. And I set up a supporter subscription here. Maybe you have multi-levels. I'm not getting that complicated for this video. Inside of this supporter subscription, I have a monthly recurring subscription that's set up, and I have a $40 per year annual subscription that's set up. So same product, two different prices. And ultimately, let me get this guy off the screen really quick. What we're going to be able to do is come and set up a payment link with that. And we're going to need two separate ones. We're going to need one for annual and one for monthly. You could ignore this donation amount piece. That was just for testing. But if I dive into this monthly payment link, what it will do is it will provide you a URL to send your users. And from FlutterFlow, this is super simple because we're going to send them outside the app. It's just how do we link back and make sure that our users get updated. That's the challenging part. So we've landed on our payment link page here. And you'll notice up here it has URL parameters. There's nothing that you actually have to do here in Stripe, but just to draw to your attention, there is an email and there is a client reference ID, and this is going to be super important so we can link back to the user ID of whatever user is trying to sign up for a subscription. Okay. Now, once we've set this up, it's pretty easy inside of FlutterFlow to take this URL, copy it, and then ultimately what we're going to do is, in my case, I had just a launch URL. If it's annual, I have a payment link for that. And if it's monthly, then I have a separate payment link. So we'll take the monthly one. And I've set up a text combine here in the action. And I'll actually drop back just to show you a little bit more context. So they click monthly or annual. That's updating page state. I realize that it's monthly. And based on that, I'm going to go ahead and launch that specific URL. Now, there's two pieces here. There's a pre-filled email, and originally I set it up this way and it was working great. And then I realized that, when people go out to the website, the email that they signed up to your app with, maybe I signed up with matt@gmail.com, but then I go to use my Apple Pay or I use one of my credit cards, and that's tied to some Yahoo account that I set up my Apple ID with. So it's just a totally different email, and there's no way to reach back out to your database, look up that user, and update their subscription. So that led me into the second piece. So this is more of a convenience. It's going to pre-fill their email like you see here. And in my case, I did the more challenging. I took an Apple user. And then the second piece is going to be passing this client reference ID. And you can take the authenticated user and get their document ID. That's what I did here, which is their Firebase user ID. And I'll show that here. So that's under this Apple Mat in this case. And we have their UID right here, but it's also part of their document. It's the same thing. And we're just sending that over, that client reference ID. And now one of the things with Stripe is you start to go through their documentation is that they have different events. And when we go back to our diagram, we're going to notice that we need to now talk back to FlutterFlow somehow or our database. And right now we're here. We've passed our client reference ID and our pre-filled email to the payment link that we've set up. And when that payment gets complete, we're going to fire off an event. And the event that we're listening for is checkout session completed. Okay, this is the first piece of the puzzle here. And this is a webhook inside of Stripe, and I'll explain what a webhook is in just a second. The reason I'm not listening for customer subscription created is because that doesn't have the client reference ID inside of that Stripe object. And I'll show that in just a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is continue to check out here on my mobile device. And instead of this email, you can say, now this user's like, whoa, what the heck? I'm an Apple user, but I don't, I'm checking out. I want to be mad at test.com is my email address. And then I'm going to come down here and choose the card. And I'm going to just go ahead and plug a bunch of stuff in here, just the test information. Okay. And then I'm going to say this is my, Apple Mat is my cardholder name. And then I have the zip code. I don't want to save my info, and I'll go ahead and click subscribe. And I don't want to remember this. Okay. And so what that's doing now is it's processing on Stripe, and ultimately when it's done, it's going to give me a nice thanks for subscribing page, tell me how much I paid. And this is great. I just click done. Stripe makes this super simple. So just click done here, and you can see it's already updated. It's already selected my supporter plan before I had this free plan that was selected up here. Okay, now let's cover what actually happened behind the scenes, and let's take a look at the webhooks and how we need to set those up. So this checkout session completed that we're listening on, I'm going to go over to my Stripe environment. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go down to our developer terminal. I'm going to go ahead and click that, and I'm going to go to webhooks. There's two webhooks that we need to set up, and you can ignore the error rate here. I was testing an old user for an old endpoint, but this checkout complete right here is basically going to call out to an endpoint that I have set up. This is a cloud function, and we'll cover that cloud function in just a moment too. But ultimately, I want to click into this, and I want to just look at the events. Okay, and let's see. I want to go and find. Here's a checkout session completed. Let's take this one right here. So this is the object that's going to be sent to my cloud function. When the checkout session is completed, we're going to fire off all this information. And I wonder if there's a refresh, because I'm pretty sure that should have gave us the new one there. Oh, here's the refresh. There we go. Okay, let's click this guy. This is the one that we just fired off at 1:08, like a minute ago. So user checked out, checkout session was completed. The reason that we're using checkout session completed is because we need that client reference ID. And you can see that here. We pass that as a URL param to that payment link in Stripe, but this ID, that MEZC4, if I come back, is the same as this Apple Mat. And even though this email address is all over the place and they use the different email address to check out in Stripe, we're still able to tie that subscription back to that user and update their next billing period as well to be 1 month in advance. So let me go back to Stripe. We're going to pass this entire object to our cloud function. And there's a couple pieces that are going to happen inside that cloud function, right? I just showed the end result. That user's subscription was updated from free to supporter, and there's a next billing period that was updated. But with this piece of information, this object that we're going to send over, there's a couple important pieces. We're going to send over a customer object that's inside of this customer field here. And I can click into this, and you can start to drill into these. If I go to object details inside of Stripe, now I can see more information about that customer. Namely, I want to be able to see from that customer should be, actually, we're gonna walk through the code because that's where I have it a little bit more structured, but we want to grab the subscription from that and just make sure that that's updated appropriately. So let's jump over to the code side of things real quick. And so I have this checkout session completed. Okay, and you're going to need to set up when you set up the Stripe webhook, you're going to have to pass over a Stripe secret key, and you're going to have a Stripe signature that's specifically relevant to the webhook that you created. Okay, that webhook secret. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. And the event that we're really listening on is the checkout session completed. Okay. I am checking if it's a subscription that they're checking out with because I had that donation in there as another test. And then ultimately, I'm looking at that client reference ID that we just looked at together inside of that object in Stripe. And I'm going to go ahead and look up a Firebase user based on that client reference ID. So making sure that there is a client reference ID to begin with. They didn't just go to the payment link, type it in their browser, and it wasn't related. Here might be a good opportunity to notify your admin, like, hey, someone paid for a subscription, but we have no idea who that is. Okay, and assuming that they didn't do that and there is a client reference ID, we can go ahead and look up that user by that user ID. If they don't exist, again, this is a good opportunity to notify your admin and say, hey, someone's paying for a subscription, but we're not giving them anything. And then we're going to move down to here. And now anywhere we see Stripe dot, this is amazing. This is the Stripe SDK talking. And if you come up here, as you bring in the npm install that Stripe, you're going to get all of the SDK features, which is really easy to talk to their data from here. So you could say stripe.subscriptions.retrieve. And we're looking at the session.subscription, and we'll come up here. And session is just all of the data that we were looking at before. So I'm going to go back to our session or our session.completed. We should be able to find subscription in here. Okay. And that subscription, before I think I click customer, you can drill into. So let's go into the object details. And you can get a little bit more information, namely what we need, I think, is the ID, but it has the associated customer with that too. And then you can really drill back to that user and relate the Firebase user to the Stripe user. Okay, I'm getting a little bit carried into the details here. So we found the user in Firebase based on the client reference ID. We're looking at the subscription from the object that's been passed back to this endpoint. Okay, when the webhook fires back to our endpoint, we're listening, we're finding the subscription piece, which is all this data related to the subscription. And then peeling back into here, we're checking when the period end is. This is important for subscriptions because we want to be able to tell the user when they're going to build next. Okay, and then we're going to look up the customer. So from the data that's passed back, we also have that customer that we can drill into. And from there, I'm just going to create a new collection called Stripe Customers. It's going to be separate from my UID field, or sorry, my users collection, but I could make this a sub collection of that users collection. There's probably a couple ways to do this. Actually, I wouldn't do that. I would just leave it separate because you're going to need to like look up the Stripe customers later. But ultimately, I'm going to save that as the customer ID of the Stripe user and then have their Firebase UID as a field here. This is so that later when a user goes to cancel a subscription, we already have their user ID in the platform, their Firebase user ID, but we can now use from this, we can now look up the Stripe customer ID so that we can cancel their subscription there. And then ultimately, we're going to set some update data. So we're going to update them to supporter. There's no more expiration. And then assuming that there's a next billing on that subscription, what I want to do is make that or update that. So you'll have three fields: subscription next billing, subscription expiration, and subscription. You could probably change that up a little bit if you need to. And then we're updating that document. So I'm going to go back to here. What we've updated here is we've made this supporter. the expiration is now null. And let me go back into here. Okay. And that's part one. So I'm going to go back to my diagram. We've successfully done a checkout session and we've updated the user subscription. You could call this create subscription, update subscription, whatever that needs to be. Now, the second piece is that users going to want to cancel at some point, and how do you handle that? And so up on the right, I'm going to pull up the QuickTime again, and I'm going to do the second piece of this. So actually, I'll go back out here. You can see I have the supporter subscription. And you'll see kind of at the bottom here, it says my next billing. That's where I wanted to show that for my users. But if I go ahead and cancel plan, basically it's just telling me that supporter access will be removed at the end of the billing period. So it's not going to immediately turn off your plan. It will do it at the end of the billing period. And so this is the second piece that we're doing. We're just going to call a Cloud function directly. Right now, the Cloud function will talk to Stripe, but we're saying confirm. That's calling an API that's set up in FlutterFlow to cancel a subscription. And it says subscription canceled, and you'll see the new information there. Your subscription's been canceled. You'll continue to have access until July 28, 2025. Okay, and I'm going to go into FlutterFlow and show that real quick. So my API calls, I'm just going to have a update subscription somewhere, cancel subscription. And what's being passed is my ID token of the user, the authenticated user. That's it. We're canceling a subscription. There's nothing else being passed. I'm just saying, hey, I'm this user, I'm authenticated, and I no longer want to be a supporter. I'm going to go back to the free plan. So now we're going to go into function 2. And so that's what's being called here. It's just a Cloud function that we've set up, this cancel subscription. And we look at the token that was passed. Okay. This is nice because the other function, we were validating a Stripe signature so that we make sure that, only calls from Stripe are coming through and valid. Here we're saying, okay, only a user with the authenticated token can update their own subscription. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm looking in the headers for the authorization. I'm looking for the bearer token. And I'm grabbing the second piece of that, which is the token itself, the ID token. Firebase admin SDK provides verify ID token function. And so we can just make sure that it's not expired, that it's issued by the correct issuer, all those great things. I'm not going to go over setting up Firebase admin SDK, but this is a really nice thing to have. Ultimately, we are also going to be able to get the user ID from the token. So that's why I literally didn't have to pass anything other than that token. You can grab that all out of there. You can decode that token, and there's a lot of good information about the user as well. So I'm going to pop back into here. And so again, if there's no user ID, that's problematic. We might want to notify admins. I'm not doing that here, or just log the errors to the server. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look up the Stripe customer. So before, we kind of lightly talked about this, but when they created a subscription, I actually, in addition to my users collection, so here I updated this to supporter. I set my expiration to null when I created. This is the creation of the subscription, and then we got 1 month ahead is the next billing. When we cancel, what we're actually doing is we're not going to update any of these fields quite yet. We're waiting for this subscription deleted to fire off. So let's handle the rest of this cancel, and then we'll take a look at these things. But the cancel subscription is actually going to look at that Stripe customers field as well. So let me go into here. And so I'm going to look up the Stripe customers with that cancel because I have the Firebase UID from the ID token. And I'm going to get the ID. I want the ID of my Stripe customer. And I have the ID of my Firebase user because they just called with a token. And ultimately, I can take, once I have the ID of that Stripe customer, this is why we have it, now I can use the Stripe SDK, and that's what you're going to see here, to look up things like their subscriptions. And so I can get the customer's ID, that is the customer's ID from this collection right here for the Stripe customer. And I'm going to look up their subscriptions. And so I'm listing them out, but I'm limiting it to 1 because in my case, you can only have 1 subscription running at a time. And if they don't have any subscriptions, again, good opportunity to notify admins. Otherwise, I'm grabbing the first subscription of that list, and I'm going to go ahead and update their subscription. So when you create a API key inside of Stripe to be able to set this function up, you're going to need to enable the ability to edit subscriptions and the ability to read customers, because we're reading from an ID, this random function's talking to your Stripe, and we're updating a subscription. And we're actually, we found that subscription. So, and we're putting this object in here that says cancel it at the end of the period so that it doesn't immediately cancel. And then we get this thing that says, hey, you're going to have access until the end of the period, and we still collect their payment for the month. Okay. Ultimately, now we have that current period end, the new one, when it's going to expire, and we can update. We can leave their subscription alone. They're still a supporter. There's not a next billing period that gets switched to null, and then we're going to set the expiration of the subscription to whatever the timestamp of this current time is. I guess that's what this is right here, the subscription expiration. And then we're just updating our database with that information. And so now what's happening is we cancel the subscription. We're coming down to here. You're still a supporter. Now this is 1 month or however long is left in the period. Maybe there's 28 days remaining. And then this next billing is null. Okay. And we got that information from the Stripe customer. So user calls API with the ID token, the bearer token for the ID. We can decode that token, pull the user ID out of it. We can look up the Stripe customer by user ID, and then we can get their Stripe customer ID. From that Stripe customer ID, we're going to look up their subscriptions, their active subscriptions. If they have an active subscription, what we're going to go ahead and do is cancel it at the end of the period. And you'll notice that this isn't fired yet. We haven't deleted a subscription. That doesn't get deleted for 28 days. And we don't want to just go in there and manually delete it 28 days later. So the last piece that's going to occur is we're going to listen for subscription deleted. Okay, and now this is the easiest one. What we need to do though is we need to set up another webhook from Stripe, because Stripe, fires these events off and has a log of them. And when they happen, I want this thing to update. I want to, take the subscription out of there and update that or make them a free user again. So the last piece that we're going to run into here is we're going to go back to our developer dashboard. We're going to go to webhooks. Actually, let me go back out to my overview. I'm really bad about navigating Stripe. Give me a second. Let me go to event destinations. And then I just have this update subscription, and the event that you're listening on is customer subscription delete. Okay, that's the only one that you need to listen on. Before I was listening on customer subscription updated. And if you have multi-subscriptions, then maybe there's a situation for that. We can probably talk about that in more detail if that's of interest. But right now, this is all I need for this. I'm going to go back to my Stripe, and we're going to see these events here, and we'll actually fire this off. So we have our events here. I'm going to collapse this. And what I want to do is I know this doesn't end for 30 days, but what we can do is actually see in our list of customers here, there's that Apple Matt. They signed up with Matt Test. That was the name they provided. Had nothing to do with their email and platform. You can, if I back out of here, you can see it at the top here, this random email, this appleid.com. Okay, so you know that there's nothing here that ties it to it, but we just made it that Stripe customers collection for that. Okay, but what you can do is you can actually, click into this, actually click into the user or the customer, and we see that supporter subscription's active, and that's when it cancels because we canceled the subscription already. But we just want to click this and we want to say cancel now. And you can do some great things, like if you wanted to, at the end of the current period, if you want to refund them based on how long they've been doing it, like prorated amount. But we're just going to do this immediately to fire this off. And you can watch over here on the right. So I'm going to cancel the subscription immediately, which should delete it. It's already updated. It's already done. But that event fires with that webhook, and it's just immediate, right? It's going to call our cloud function and get our subscription updated. So let's walk through the last one really quickly. I'm going to go to my developer portal down here. I'm going to open this guy up. And sometimes Stripe, when you leave it open for too long, just gets like really slow. I don't know why. Maybe that's something on my end. I'm going to go to events. We'll refresh this again. Perfect. So you can see the updated fired, but more importantly, deleted. That's the one I'm listening on. In this customer subscription deleted, now here's all the info that comes along with that, right? And importantly, I think it's that subscription ID that we're looking for, or the customer that's related to it. So we're going to fire this object, this event, off to our third endpoint, which is delete subscription. Okay, let's take a look at that together really quick. And I have that just update subscription. So before I was listening, I had the whole thing looking up people by email, and it was working great. And then I did Apple sign in and realized that also people just use different cards or different emails to sign up on different platforms and stuff. So it's too messy. But we're going to have a very similar workflow, right? We have a secret key still. We need to be able to update subscriptions, or sorry, not update subscriptions. We just need to be able to pull that information in and update the user in our database to be able to reflect a free plan. Okay. So you'll have your own Stripe signature or Webhooks secret when you create this function, and I would just call it delete. I was getting messy because I was trying a bunch of things. And then you'll have different types of events, but you don't even need a switch here because the only event you're listening on is customer subscription deleted. So we have the object. We looked at that together, right? That's this whole object right here. We're going to get the customer ID from that object, which is just the customer field. Again, I can go down to here, but yeah, it's a little bit slow. So customer, you see that customer ID. That's our customer in Stripe, and that's the what just got updated. And if you recall, that's why we created our Stripe customers collection in Firebase. Okay, beautiful. And that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at the Stripe customers for that customer ID, and I'm just getting that user, and that Stripe customer has a Firebase UID associated with it. So you see, I'm going to be pulling that from somewhere, making sure that they exist, right? Because if they don't, then we have problems. And then we're getting the Firebase user ID, which is the field from the data that comes out of that document. And then I'm using the admin SDK to update the users collection to now update them to free. And now there's no next billing or expiration. And that's the end of our flow. So now we've come down and their subscription has expired at the end of the month and they're going back to a free plan. And both of these guys are null. And you can see that here. Don't have a next billing or anything like that. And the same thing would work for the annual subscriptions, guys. It's going to be the exact same process. There's nothing different that you need to change inside of your function. You're already looking for the next billing period. And that's the whole walkthrough of managing subscriptions with Stripe using payment links. So being able to take them out of the application. Awesome. Let me know if you have any questions, guys, and throw comments in the chat if I was unclear in any areas, and happy to help clarify those or share code. And then let me know if there's any other integrations that you guys are struggling with. Maybe I can try and tackle another video on another Saturday. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody.